Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream Podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the New Mainstream Podcast. Excited to welcome Jay Hasbrouck today, Senior Staff Researcher at Google and author of Ethnographic Thinking, From Method to Mindset. Jay's built a career at the intersection of anthropology, foresight, and product innovation, helping some of the world's most influential companies see beyond the present to design for the future. His work sits right at the crossroads of culture, technology, and strategy, making him a great guest to explore how foresights shape insights and how both are transforming the way we build products, experiences, and businesses. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mario. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Coming in on a Friday, a well-earned Friday. I don't know, something's going on. Well, it's the end of the month. Maybe that's what it is.
Maybe.
Summer's ending.
Yeah. Or people were expecting a slow summer and didn't get one. Maybe that's it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, before we dive in, something we do with all guests is kind of talk about career journey. I mean, and we had a conversation before. You've had a really interesting career, anthropology, innovation, working at IDEO. Would love to just hear a little bit about your career journey and how you ended up at Google.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to share. I mean, I was drawn to anthropology, I think, in the same way a lot of other people were who go into it. It's like, I really like this idea of real world insight, right? Like you have an impact on, you're pulling from the real world, but you also have an impact on the real world itself, your insights, right? And so I felt like that was the place for me, and I think it still is. But academia wasn't the version that worked for me. So I felt like you didn't end up, like talking to the people that were. You ended up talking to other anthropologists largely in the academy. So that drew me to the applied space, and so I spent some time early on in my career at Intel. And that was a pretty unique spot to start. They had been working, social scientists had been working there for a long time, actually, before I got there, like psychologists and other folks. And I was in the digital home group there. We were the first group that was actually in a product group. And that was super interesting work, did a lot of work around the globe, looking at where is technology going in the next 2 or 3 years.
And was this like early days of like connected smart home?
Exactly. Well, they were trying to figure it out. One of the projects that I worked on was exactly that. And what I did there was I put together this project focusing on green homeowners, people who are environmentally, aware, and really tried to get a sense of like who's at the cutting edge there. How are they managing the home and the resources in it, and what can we learn from them as we start thinking about smart thermostats and things like that. But at that time, that was the future. Right now everybody has one, but. So Intel was great. It's a great learning experience. And one of the things that was interesting about it was like, because chip production is like 2 years out, they develop a chip and then by the time it hits a device, you've got a good 2-year span in there. So you kind of have to think ahead. And we didn't call it Foresight's research at all then, but we had to use a lot of the same methods and techniques to think beyond the present in a lot of ways. So then from Intel, I went on to, I did spent some time at IDEO, which was a really great experience, and like built some strong muscle there around human-centered design. And then from there, went on my own for a long time. I was in consulting for like 11 years. Really enjoyed that. But
did you focus on a particular industry in your consulting work?
I didn't. I mean, like, there were some obvious ones. I think a lot of that comes down to what are the industries and who are the industries that were receptive to this kind of work, And so I think that varies. Like I think some industries, they're much more comfortable with market research, right? With much more sort of like market sizing and, those kind of more traditional measures. So technology for sure and healthcare were two of the biggies for me. Like they were spaces, and some actually quite a bit of consumer CPGs, consumer packaged goods, consumer, yeah. So those were the big three, I would say. Yeah, tons of interesting work there. A lot of 0 to 1 work, and that was all sort of like people who were like, we don't know what's going on in the market in France. Can you help us figure out why the French hate us?
Yeah.
So yeah, work like that. And then I decided to go back in house. I was getting a little burned out on consulting, and so I wanted to see projects through more. Start from zero and see it all the way through to launch. So that I went in house at Meta, spent some time there as a pathfinder, um, a role that's actually pretty well defined there, and then moved from there to my current role in Google.
So now, from our previous conversation, you mentioned it here. It seems like you're squarely focused on foresight. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, if I think I consider what I do as a combination of, and it really is a mixed methods approach. So I think foresight is a huge way, or a huge tool, a really important tool for understanding, what are the signals that we see out there that are early indicators of change, and where are the patterns that we see across those signals. But I don't think those are useful in and of themselves. I think really when they become valuable is when you land them in something that's more foundational, like human behavior that we see that extends over time. So if we see sort of trajectories of change, or or pathways, um, and we understand sort of the history of this particular behavior is well founded. We're experiencing in the past, and then in the currently we're experiencing it this way, and we're seeing signals of that continuing, or some other version of it continuing into the future. Then we know we're kind of anchored. Um, so I distinguish like foresight pretty clearly from futurist work, for example, where it's sort of like anything goes type, which are all
And can you
useful.
can you and I threw that out there, but the majority of our listeners are insights, marketing research. For those that may not be too familiar with foresights, like could you what is foresights from your purview?
Yeah, yeah, happy to share. Well, a lot of foresight is thinking about. I mean, the sort of like elevator pitch part is like thinking into the future and then working your way backward from there, right? So you're like, and anything beyond 5 years really is conjecture, but usually foresight thinks 2 years out, 2 to 5 years. That's a lot of that work takes place there,
Okay.
and it involves some of the methods involve signal scanning or horizon scanning. Like, who are the people, who are the edge cases out there, who are the visionaries, who are the consumers that are reinventing your product, for example, or they're like tinkering and hacking what you've got out there in the world, right? Like, people are truly being creative and trying to see, is there a pattern across here, and what might be driving that pattern, and then you work back from there. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Some of the traditional methods, like interviews with experts and visionaries, things like that, right? Sometimes it involves just going to conferences and seeing what are people, what's the chatter in the hallway. I mean, you get a ton from that, right? It also involves secondary research, where you're just really scanning like industry publications for what's out there. There's some interesting little side methods that are kind of fun too, like patent filings. Who are the companies out there that are filing new stuff? Like, and what exactly is in those patents? That's a nice sort of early indicator, especially in technology. Um, and then I think a ton of that Foresight's work is also trying to think across the patterns in those, across all of these, right? So you may see indications of, for example, you mentioned market research. You may see early indications of some growth, unexpected growth in some space. Um, so one example I worked on a project where they were looking at Nigeria in particular as a market, and they were wondering like what's going on in this space, particularly for youth. And so we started doing some digging, and one of the things we saw that was really interesting was we started stumbling across all these YouTube videos of younger people in Nigeria that were complaining about how school wasn't relevant for them, And there were so many other ways that they could make a living, but what they were getting educated, what they were getting trained to do was off the mark. And so we started seeing so many of those. We're like, okay, there's a something here. So then we started looking through our secondary research at the school system, how it was funded, what are they training people in, where are the actual jobs that are in the marketplace now, and started thinking about what does that offering look like in that context. So you saw, a ton of people that were interested in crypto, for example, because they saw that as an opportunity to invest in what's next. So that was that's a case of like, what do you look for when you're
Yeah.
thinking?
So kind of what I'm gathering is it's like you have your go-to signals, but then also it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, there's like just some randomness involved too. Like you might hear about a trend. Let's say you went to a conference, they mentioned something, you're kind of following up. Feels like almost like detective work, right? Where you're trying to, um, maybe you have a hypothesis, maybe you hear some chatter online and you follow up to verify, is this actually a signal or is this just a random person who happened to say this on YouTube or Google search?
Yeah, completely. I mean, a lot of it is detective work. I mean, some of your listeners might be familiar with snowball sampling, where you talk to someone and you're like, you get a lot out of it, and you ask them, who else do you know that I should talk to? There's there's a little bit of that logic in there, but I mean, there's also, though, we have some new tools that are at our fingertips now, like using products like Gemini or ChatGPT, where you can dig through Reddit, for example, and go to some subreddits and be like, start probing for like patterns across the things that people share in forums like that. So, there's some of it is sort of the snowball, but some of it is also the patterns is almost easier now to identify those patterns with some of the tools we have.
For sure. And I remember one thing I used to use, and I don't know why I stopped using it. Probably AI, Gemini, ChatGPT, but um, Google Trends I used to use a lot. Like if I saw like, so I remember early days, for example, of oh my gosh, now I'm even forgetting the word, Latinx, right? Latinx was big. We did a lot of work and started hearing it on the political scene. Um, and Google Trends used to be really helpful. Like, okay, are people actually Google searching this, and I'm sure now there's a lot more tools, but um, I imagine that's probably helpful at your role as well.
Totally, yeah. Google Trends. I mean, I'll list some of the Google products, of course, but Google Trends, Google Alerts. I think there are a lot of like ways to sort of keep your finger on the pulse of different areas of promise. I think one of the things that I do a lot of at the front end that people don't typically talk about, because it's more about listening to your internal stakeholders, right? Helping define where is it that they are seeing, because they're in the business too, right? Whatever business you're in, what are they seeing? So gives you some buckets to think in as you start exploring. So that's also part of the Foresight's sort of workflow, is understanding where to look in the beginning.
And so, kind of anchoring it to your work, I don't know, can you share either something at Google or previous role where like foresight maybe changed the trajectory of a product or a strategy? Maybe kind of take us through a case study.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, I could pick up where we were talking earlier about Nigeria. That's because that's a great example where we started seeing a gap in the market. And so I was working with basically a founder of someone who was looking to build product in Africa. And they were looking for an opportunity also to get into the education space, possibly too. They felt like there was a lot of opportunity there, but didn't know where and how and what it would have looked like. And their initial sort of hypothesis was like, let's create a tutor, like help people learn what they're learning in school, but better, faster, etc. But they learned very quickly, but that wasn't what the market wanted. We learned very quickly that wasn't what the market wanted, as we started seeing where's the vision young people have in Nigeria in particular for their future. And so we started looking much more specifically at that. And a lot of the things that they concentrated on were things like I mentioned, crypto, and some of this was embedded within sort of um, like they felt like the educational institutions were not serving them well, but also sort of a mistrust in financial institutions as well. So crypto kind of made sense. Um, and we ended up steering that product much more toward non-traditional learning, right? So it was like it wasn't about getting better at math and English. It became more about, how can you understand cryptocurrencies much more quickly? How can you be an innovator yourself? And we got a lot more. The product got a lot more traction when it started following that path that was already in play, versus trying to sort of just like thrust a product out there because you think it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And I like that example because it also marries market research, right? It seems like you're picking up these signals through an untraditional channel, YouTube, seeing where that market is going, and then developing a product towards the trend versus trying to sell something that maybe isn't necessarily in demand.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a pretty significant pivot for them as a team. But I think I think one of the kind of big takeaways there was like this division that we had made between formal and informal learning was kind of unnecessary. Was irrelevant, I think, to the youth that we were trying to serve, because like what they wanted was sort of a practical component that they were missing. So we were just filling a gap, and maybe it could include actually some formal learning or styles of learning that are formal, but it was outside of the formal system of learning.
Yeah, that's cool. And that actually leads me to my next question, where you obviously are working in a global space. You mentioned Nigeria. Google is obviously a global product. In insights work, I think one of the big issues we have are representative samples. Um, I imagine, working for a company like Google, representative samples are critical, but you're also looking to launch products at scale that hundreds of millions of people want to use. So how do you balance that, like, scale with depth in terms of who you're talking to, where you're gathering the signals from, samples, etc.?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think pulling from anthropology is a really good place to start. I think for thinking about sample and the population you intend to serve, because having a diverse sample is essential, right? You want to be collecting data across and really getting a broad understanding, so that you're not missing perspective. You want more perspective at the beginning of any project, so you want a representative sample at all, at every step of the way. But I think also some of the way in which we sequence our work is also helpful. Like thinking about like some of the exploratory stuff at the beginning in the qualitative sense, still a representative sample, but a much smaller sample, right? Helps lead you into where you might go for understanding scope and scale with quantitative research. And then even coming back again to qual for validation. So I think all of that helps frame the work in a way that gives you got substantiated insights, but you're doing it in a way that that's across all of those. You want a representative sample, but you're doing it in a way that is a build. So I think that's critical to how I at least structure a lot of the work there.
One of the things I was thinking about in our kind of our conversation leading up to this was also that balance of mass appeal. But if you find something in a particular market, like let's say China, for example, and let's take a Google product, Pixel phones, right? You are trying to create a product that has mass appeal. But if you see a signal come in from a specific country or region, how do you balance having that mass appeal, but also making room for signals that that have a big potential there, and kind of integrating that without alienating other clients? I'm just curious how you balance that
Yeah, I mean
in your
it's
work.
tricky. Yeah, it's tricky doing any kind of global work for sure. A lot of times, I mean, as I mentioned before, the sort of diverse sample, the representative sample comes at the beginning. That's sort of like, that's almost the easy part, right? Making sure you're talking to a wide enough range. Um, but then I think as you move on, one of the things that becomes critical in the synthesis stage is to start listening for exactly what you're talking about. So what is uniquely Chinese that we're hearing in that space that we couldn't say is transferable or happens the same way in the US or in South America, et cetera. And oftentimes in those cases, what we'll do is we'll start bucketing those unique qualities to that geo and then ask ourselves as we get further along in the process, do we see a pattern there? And so if you start seeing things that are uniquely Chinese, for example, and if we see a pattern across those things, then you can start leveling up. You say, well, is that pattern also identifiable in another geo or across geos? And if it is, then you can try to see about where's the bigger opportunity there. If it's not, then maybe you do need to think about a unique offering for that plate for that particular sample.
Yeah. And is you mentioned a little bit, we talked a little bit about AI, Gemini, ChatGPT. How much has AI come into your workflow nowadays? Like, I mean, you're at one of the companies leading some of the development there, but you also had a career before AI. Like, how has that shaped how you work and how you're thinking about your work now?
Yeah. I mean, these tools are developing and changing really rapidly, and it's really hard to like put a stake in the ground. I mean, one thing we do know, at least from the research side, is that pattern identification, they're pretty strong in that, right? Like it's not always accurate, but it can get you a long way. As I mentioned before, like you could use a lot of these tools to like look at what's happening on Reddit to get a very quick snapshot of opinion around, even experts, their opinions around, like a service that they're using. So I think that's incredibly valuable. I think there's a little bit of, like we still need to iron out a lot of like how the outputs are digested and used. And, because we're definitely at risk of some of the hallucinations magnifying. All right. And so then that becomes more fodder for the next model to come along, even though it's not true. It's not factual. It's then now becomes more data that gets built into the system. So, I mean, they call it system collapse or model collapse. I think we'll see. Like I think there's still a lot of guardrails that need to be placed. But I think if one of the things that I think one of the most promising areas is a lot of people in this space are learning that tighter models, smaller models that have like tight data constraints and very specific assignments actually perform much better than trying to say like tap all of the web, to
Yeah,
answer
I mean,
one
I
question.
mean, this is not a Google plug, but like NotebookLM is I think one of those dark horse tools that if you know how great it is. Like, not a lot of people know about it anecdotally, um, but I'm trying to learn a new language, for example, and it's so helpful for like studying.
It's a
Like,
great, I know it's a
yeah,
great tool. And, I probably don't use this for a language, but it also has that mind map. Have you used that mind map tool?
I haven't used a mind map. I used the podcast tool, which was
Yeah.
kind of cool, like a specific lesson that I want to like learn on the road. I'm like, turn this into a podcast. That was cool. But it creates little daily quizzes and everything for me. I haven't used the mind map though.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole suite of little, like, very interesting tools built in. Yeah, the podcast is great. The mind map is you can feed it a bunch of documents, right? And it'll look across all of them and identify themes. And then you can click into, it's like a flowchart. You can click into each one and then it'll expand that category. And then so it organizes all of the information within the documents you give it. And then it tries to summarize what it thinks, how they're interrelated, basically.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's really useful to when you want the big picture, basically.
Yeah. Um, talking about the models, I want to shift a little bit. Some of your work involves advertising products, and I think one of the concerns about AI and AI generated content is some people say that, or there's a predictions up to like 80% of the internet's going to be AI generated. right? Which then begs the question, well, what's the point of using the internet? I know we talked a little bit about itself about how Google's tackling quality, content quality. Can you talk a little bit about what you all are doing? Because I imagine that, I mean, that's part of your Foresight's work, looking at the trends, and um, that seems like an existential problem for Google and many other tech online
Oh,
companies.
for sure. Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, it's an issue that I think any tech company, well, many are looking at. Any that deal with content for sure. Yeah, it's a big thing. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of Google, but I can speak on behalf of myself. And one of the things I can say is that for sure that we are looking at the health of the web, right? Like, what is that? What does that mean? And where is that? And it doesn't exclude people using AI tools. Like that doesn't. There's still plenty of creativity and still plenty of original, authentic content that can be generated from that, using different tools. Um, but I think trust becomes really huge, right? So it's sort of like if you think about AI, and a lot of AI tools are kind of still looking for product market fit, right? It's like they can do a lot of things, but like, no, I mean, like ChatGPT is growing very fast, so is Gemini, right? But like, there's no sort of like hero product right now, and maybe there never will be. I don't know, but that product market fit right now is I mean, part of the challenge there is that what's technically feasible hasn't aligned with what people value and trust. And so I think that people are still pretty cautious about the kind of responses they get from AI. And I think and especially when it comes to content generation, like imagery, and like, it creates suspicion about whether or not this was generated by an AI or not. Like, and so if that problem isn't solved, we're not going to get to product market fit, right? Like that's because it's like without trust and value, it's like like you said, why would you even go to the web? So I mean, my personal opinion on this is that this sort of the authentic side of content generation actually will increase in value because there's it's so easy now to just pump out stuff that I think we might start to see people who intentionally distinguish themselves as original content generators, right? Like, and they go out of their way to draw attention to, and to maybe the watermark, pieces of content, things like that, so that they are ensuring their audience that yes, they're legit, they're authentic, it's coming from them. They're building that trust, and therefore building value on the web, and then certainly a part of that is comes through in terms of monetizing for ads or however. I think a lot of people now are doing this kind of combination of monetization. They're doing subscription and ad. So I feel like that's where we're going to go because like this endless spool of AI slop isn't really going to serve anybody, like so.
No, yeah, I agree, and I think I mentioned this last time. I'm a mountain biker, and I go to the web for honest reviews around products, and I Google pedals, and I have to cycle through four or five clearly AI generated posts before I get to some a trustworthy site. And I've been thinking about that since our last conversation, and yeah, it puts a premium on authentic content. Um, and yeah, I guess I'm also finding myself going back to kind of the trustworthy websites or companies that I know have editors and are actually trying these mountain bike products.
Yeah, so then their value become is higher for you, what I'm saying,
Hmm.
because you're going to skip past all those earls that look like they're manufactured, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, somebody may, there could be some founder out there that's going to come up with like really quick, easy ways to identify authentic content and
Yeah.
surface it, right? Like, and so like you can distinguish it very quickly. So I mean, I'm sure there are endless ways to innovate on this, but I feel like
Yeah,
the
but
value.
I like your positioning though, because I think, so much of the conversation right now is dominated by doom and gloom of AI. It's going to take over our jobs. Um, But the way you're positioning, it's like, well, yeah, that may be, but really, if anything, it puts a premium on authenticity, which is human, and it makes that more important. Because like um, to my point about finding pedals, it's like I'm not going to trust an AI. They've never ridden a mountain bike,
Right.
you know.
Totally. Totally. And
So
in the process, your radar got more fine tuned to
right,
sort out the crap. Right. So like,
right, yeah, no, that's interesting. Well, talking about content, a fun part of the podcast I have is like asking guests. Part of it is for our listeners. Part of it is selfish. I've got a lot of great content, but any kind of podcasts, books, streaming series that have inspired you lately, helped your work, or maybe not, just something that you're enjoying to unplug.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think on AI, there's an author at the Atlantic, Matteo Wong, who publishes quite often on AI, and I think he's worth just following and reading some of his stuff. And he deals with AI hallucinations and thinks through some of this stuff in depth, you know. So I think he's a good foil for a lot of his thinking. Um, and then I did a project early on at Meta that was focused on storytelling. And I really got into storytelling as like just a mode of like sharing insight. And I did a bunch of research on it, and it was a fun way to plug into social media, as well. And I came across this one book called Do/Story. And it's a great little small book that just sort of gives you like good rules for like how to convey a story. So like I think it's 10 rules or something. The author is Buppet Buster. And like, for example, like while telling a story, at somewhere in the story, try to find one gleaming object that actually like focuses the listener's attention on that thing that's also a metaphor for the larger message you want to get across. So it's like tips like that, right? Like very
Yeah, like
practical tips.
actual tangible things to
Yeah,
do. I
yeah.
like that.
Yeah, she does a lot of consulting for the entertainment industry, but that's worth a read, and it's very quick, and it's a nice way to sort of train yourself on how to
I'm going to
influence.
definitely read that because I just had a guest early on this morning who was talking about storytelling. She's at Susan G. Komen, so like healthcare, but talking about the importance of storytelling. And oftentimes it's hard to get at what who is a good storyteller or what makes a good story. So good to know there's a book that kind of distills that down into 10 principles.
So yeah, highly recommend that one. Yeah, yeah, and like in general, I try to avoid the news.
Yeah, same. I'm not even watching linear TV at this point. It's I sport sometimes, so it's like really weird when you put on sports too early or leave it on too long, and then news comes on after not watching it for a while. It's pretty jarring.
Totally, totally, yeah. And speaking of sports, I think that's like like if you're looking for a place like and sports and foresight, right? Like and also authenticity. It clicks, a lot of buttons. It's not going anywhere. It's only getting bigger. So like,
Yeah, no, and that's a kind of interesting culmination of everything that we're talking about, right? It's a great lab for utilizing so much technology, so much AI,
yeah.
yet it's still people playing the sport. And if you replace that, no one's going to watch robots playing baseball or basketball.
except
Like
for except for to laugh at it, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, maybe. But yeah, that is an interesting point. Yeah, speaking I mean baseball, I mean I streaming the Dodger, and I see Google is a big sponsor, and Google is doing a lot in terms of giving real time AI stats for watchers, which is cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So last segment here, believe it or not, we're almost done. Any advice for people that want to get into the foresight field? I mean, um, it's kind of an interesting time for young people to get into the industry. But what's some advice that you would give someone kind of early career?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I thought about this. I do get like a lot of prompts or whatever, like questions from people about that. I think a couple of things for sure. One of them is like if you're just starting out in the space, I think it's always a good idea, or not always, but it's very valuable to start off in consulting because you're exposed to a lot of different industries and you get to see how the world works in different ways, right? So it's like that exposure is huge, and it goes a long way when you're starting to think about how are you contributing to value, like what is valuable for a healthcare company versus what's valuable for a tech company, and it differs, and they also have each have their own culture as well. So I would say that's all, you can't go wrong doing something like that, or coming close to it. And then I think also like especially now, maybe everyone has to think more flexibly about their career path. And so trying to not sort of hold yourself to other people's standards, right? Thinking not to think so linearly, perhaps, about your career path. And each stage is, every decision you make is going to lead to another set of decisions, right? And so like, I think, try to be open, like, and listen to that, what's really compelling for you. It isn't always necessarily going to be the highest salary, and it's not always going to be the most prestigious position, et cetera. But I think that really helps, like to follow that and not lock yourself into what sort of the traditional paths are. And I think with AI, it's certainly more the case. I think those two on a very practical level. And I think, like I've seen a lot of people follow both that, be sort of flexible there, but then also really, really prioritize humility. And those are the people who end up happy in their careers. Right. And so like, I think that goes, like admit when you're wrong, there's some very, very, like basic principles there, but like they go a long way in terms of just like, feeling like you're in the right place at the workplace and knowing when you're not, but humility is huge. It's like,
No, that's great advice, and consulting is great too because you get to find out what you like, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you need to work on, and you're right about the traditional career path. I think that's changing. I mean, I've talked to a lot of young people. 9 to 5, one company isn't the only way to go now. There's so many people with a consulting gig and a part-time and a contract um, that have flexible schedules and are making a decent living. The 9 to 5 thing isn't necessarily a thing anymore. I think the future of work is changing, especially with all the tools now that we have.
yeah. Someone, I can't remember who was saying this. It might have been who's the CEO of NVIDIA? I can't remember what his name is, but anyway, I think he was saying like in the next 10 years that we're going to have X number of new AI based millionaires or whatever. Like there's so many ways to be a startup, so many new ways to think about how you can serve the market. Like you really, I mean, a job may not be the path to,
Right.
to
Yeah.
getting there.
Awesome. Well, Jay, really great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. For people that want to connect with you or maybe learn more about your work, you have a website. Could you share that? And I'll make sure to also share that in the notes.
Sure, yeah. My blog is ethnographicmind.com. And then I also have just like jhasbrouck.com as well, which is basically a resume. And people can reach out on LinkedIn as well. It's probably the easiest, fastest place.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jay, for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks, Mario. It's a pleasure.
Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.